we saw pretty significant numbers of what I would describe as protest votes in Minnesota, around 19% who chose to opt out of the Democratic primary altogether, refusing to vote for Biden, presumably because there's quite a big Somalian diaspora living in Minnesota in protest over the Gaza conflict, obviously.
Hello out there, and welcome to your weekly update on everything geopolitics that matters to your portfolio. My name is Mikkel Rosenvold. I'm head of geopolitics here at Stena Research, and with me I have, as usual, Anne Senager from Paris. Welcome to you, Anne.
Great to be here on a very exciting US politics day in particular.
Absolutely. We've just passed Super Tuesday. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then we have a State of the Union speech coming up, which we're very much looking forward to. We'll get back to that in a moment. This podcast is going to, or the show is going to be very much about US politics. So I suspect we'll be demonetized and everything from YouTube. So it's a great help if you share and subscribe and whatever you can do to boost this channel if you like the show. Thanks a lot for that. If you want more of our geopolitical content, you can go to stenaresearch.com and sign up for either our free newsletter or a free 14-day trial. That will give you access to an article I wrote earlier this week, which we'll just start with before we venture into US politics. And that's some takeaways from Li Qiang's great speech at the Great National People's Assembly in China. It's an event that we watch each year, which lays out a couple of strategic direction and strategic targets for the Chinese government. Obviously, China has been kind of slow-moving. We haven't seen quite the growth rates that we expected after the COVID reopening. About a year ago, we had huge expectations that China was going to swoop in and save the world economy, and they haven't really done so yet. So the growth rate in 2023 was around 5%, which was a little bit disappointing, especially considered that, of course, the growth rate is a comparison to the year before, which was the heavy lockdown year of 2022. So we were very interested to see what the growth targets would be for 2024. And this is what Li Qiang emphasized heavily in the speech. And so that's the first takeaway I have, is the new growth target of, again, 5%. That's obviously even more ambitious than the previous 5%, because now you're measuring on top of 2023. From Chinese standards over the past decades, it's not a hugely ambitious target, but it still shows that there are a lot of growth potential in the Chinese economy, especially compared to Western states. This is more or less in line with the growth expectation that most markets have and our own forecasts. So it seems like the Chinese government is setting themselves a target that they can actually reach, which might be coming very handy for political reasons as well. A couple of other takeaways is obviously that the Chinese government has, in my view, centralized some of the problem solving in the economical sphere. We're used to the Chinese government basically laying out these establishing these are the problems, and then it's up to the local governments to solve these problems. The central government seems more focused on solving the real estate crisis with some very select interventions and support for the real estate sector, and most likely also increased centralized stimulus packages, which will lead to the central government taking on a lot of debt instead of the local governments and the state-owned corporations taking on a lot of debt. So that's both from a financial and also from a political standpoint quite interesting. The thing is still that while China is trying to move away from the producer-heavy economy into a more consumer-based, middle-income style economy, China is still in a very repressive political environment, and that hasn't changed. Only if anything, it's changed to being even more repressive and more of a closed political process, and that doesn't bode too well. It's not too welcomed by potential Western investors, which China is still looking for. So that was a couple of takeaways. You can read more in depth on our article on stenaresearch.com. We'll continue to cover China, of course, from all aspects. We're looking at both the real estate sector, the banking, the central bank policy, etc. from China. So we'll continue to do that over the coming months. But now, Anne, let's turn to the US. A lot more flavor, a lot more party going on over there. It can sometimes be a little bit boring to watch these Chinese statesmen talk, but there's much more show in the US. What was your takeaway, Anne, from the Super Tuesday debacle?
Well, I guess the headline was that it solidified what I think most of us have already expected, that we are heading to a rematch of the head-to-head between Biden and Trump for November 2024. Overwhelmingly so. I believe Trump only lost the state of Vermont to Nikki Haley, who has then since dropped out. One of the other two big news stories, I'd say, from Tuesday. And Biden, similarly, a clean sweep, except I believe American Samoa, or something where he lost to a local, to a businessman who ousted him with 11 votes or so.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was 91 votes in total, so that's not really significant for the general election, where American Samoa has no votes, essentially, as well. So obviously, we're poised for Biden-Trump rematch. Two elderly gentlemen, but it's going to be quite the spectacle.
Yes.
I know, and
it was also interesting to see, although not too surprising, there was a few preliminary hints of the weaknesses, I'd say, of the both of the camps. We saw pretty significant numbers of what I would describe as protest votes in Minnesota, around 19% who chose to opt out of the Democratic primary altogether, refusing to vote for Biden, presumably because there's quite a big Somalian diaspora living in Minnesota, in protest over the Gaza conflict, obviously. Similarly, the few constituencies that Nikki Haley actually managed to win was heavy on college-educated, suburban inhabitants. So, which was a key demographic for Biden's win in 2020. So that will be important for Trump to try and regain some of those Haley voters that now have nowhere else to go.
Yeah, and that is a real Achilles heel, because I think it's very likely that a lot of the primary voters who opted for Nikki Haley are going to lean Biden, actually, in the general election, to switch party, basically. And exactly that demographic, the suburban college-educated voters, are they vote in huge numbers. Their turnout is usually good. That's going to be a very big issue for Trump, and I think I completely agree. That's one of the major takeaways. I know when you did an article,
exactly. It's a demographic that has only grown since the 2020 election as well. As you, I think you're getting to shameless plug. I wrote an article about the demographic shifts that we have seen in the U.S. since 2020. So.
Absolutely, and I completely
take that
agree
out
with
if they're interested.
Yeah, and obviously the demographics continue to favor the Democrats, but somehow the Republican election machine keeps churning out victories across the U.S. And while it's not perhaps too sensational that the opponent is leading the incumbent at this point of the election campaign, I still think it's interesting to look at a recent poll from Bloomberg across several of the expected swing states or battleground states. I apologize for the poor graphics here. Went a little fast. We were covering a lot of other topics, but anyway, basically Trump is leading these seven general elections expected swing states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. He's not leading by a huge margin in all these states, but he's leading. As said, that's not too sensational at this point. What I really noticed is the difference between a Trump versus Biden setup and a Trump versus Biden versus Robert F. Kennedy setup. Because if Robert F. Kennedy is on the ballot in all these states, he's going to draw more votes from Biden than from Trump, and that shifts the advantage even more in favor of Donald Trump. So I think this is another headache for the Biden campaign. They are fighting heavily to keep Robert F. Kennedy off the ballot, but his campaign seems to be so well organized, and he seems to be so close to getting on the ballot in a lot of these states that it's going to be really tricky. I'm really curious to see how Trump will react to this Robert F. Kennedy story, because in some way he has to hope that RFK gets on the ballot, really. How do you view this whole Kennedy situation then?
I think he's actually quite, from what I can tell, quite popular with people from both sides of the aisle, but certainly a bigger headache for Biden. And I think he will run. So it is an issue that needs to be taken seriously. For example, Michigan, as we see now as well, one of the closest calls. Another one of the states where there's been a big protest vote against Biden in the primary. So I believe a lot of people would be swayed for a third-party candidate if he runs.
Yeah, I agree. The thing to remember here is that Trump needs to win almost all these swing states to win the general election. Biden will most likely gain the most votes, and Biden has a broader base of very secure Democratic states. If Trump wins all these 7 states, as he's right now favored to do, he's in with a very good shot. But he has to keep this up. So we'll see. Still a long way to go to November, but some interesting numbers nonetheless. We'll try and keep on top of them as we go. So Anne, to round off, I would like to hear your thoughts. What do you think Joe Biden is going to talk about in the State of the Union tonight, U.S. time?
Yeah, I actually spent a few hours at a voting center here in Paris on Tuesday, chatting with a few Democratic representatives. Obviously, it's only Democrats who have delegates specifically for expats abroad. I would have loved to visit some Republican voting centers too, but they don't exist, unfortunately. A lot of them expect, like Democratic campaigners expect Biden to go heavy in on this economic populist agenda he has, tooting his own horn in terms of low unemployment numbers, the inflation, which he has been able to temper at least until now, well, compared to at least Europe. I also expect him to obviously use this Super Tuesday as like a starting off point to really frame what this 2024 general election will be about. Will be a Trump versus Biden matchup and what that contrast means. So really framing that head to head. I also expect him to touch on immigration. If I were him, I would make sure that people knew about how it'd been going down in Congress, about all these immigration / national security bills being first proposed by Republicans, then retracted, and so forth. Making the American people know what has been going down there, and lastly, a foreign policy, of course, which is looking to be a way bigger issue this time around than in 2020.
Exactly. I agree with you completely. The timing is so interesting, just on top of the Super Tuesday and basically the setup of the Trump-Biden rematch, that I think this is going to be basically the kickoff of the general elections. We're going to see what's his framing going to be like heading into the election. And on a more superficial level, I'm interested to see how his presence is, what kind of energy level is he trying to present, because Trump is trying to sort of trap him in the Jeb Bush trap of saying that he's a low energy candidate. And how do you get out of that? By demonstrating a lot of energy that seems desperate. So yeah, I'm basically really interesting to see that.
It's way more important than what he says. I completely agree. I think his aides have also been very keen on that. They've been camping out in I believe Camp David, trying to run over the speech. I think they had a separate room set up for him to just practice the speech over and over again. Yeah, the energy and the delivery will be everything.
Absolutely. Very interesting to see this tonight. We'll follow up with some news on the State of the Union in coming days. We have a lot of other stuff going on. We're working on a broad focus on the German economy. Kolonialstandardresearch.com will have a lot more about that. In the meantime, as I mentioned, click on the bell icon, or like and click on the bell icon. I don't know all those YouTube stuff. You know them out there. Follow our channel, watch our shows. Thanks a lot to you, Anne, for joining, and thanks a lot to you all for watching. We'll be back next week.